What is the meaning of this treachery?
It means you are ruined, my dear.
The morning sun streamed through the stained glass, illuminating a scene of absolute ruin. The Duke stared at the parchment in his hands, his fingers trembling violently. Across the mahogany table, his wife did not look up. She simply, methodically, buttered her toast. The trap had finally snapped shut. The year was 1888, and the chill of late autumn hung heavy over the sprawling grounds of the Clarendon estate in Derbyshire. Inside the grand dining room, the atmosphere was even colder. At one end of a magnificent 20-foot mahogany table sat William Hastings, the 9th Duke of Clarendon. At the age of 42, William was a man of sharp, predatory, handsome features, possessing a gaze that commanded obedience and a title that commanded respect. He was impeccably dressed, as always, in a tailored charcoal morning coat, his cravat tied with mathematical precision. At the far end of the table sat his wife of 2 years, Lady Seraphina. Born into the unfathomably wealthy Fitzroy family, she had been a prize of immense value. A quiet, modest girl of 26, with a dowry of £200,000. When William had courted her, high society had whispered that it was the perfect union of ancient blood and modern industry. Seraphina's father had made his fortune in the railway boom, and William desperately needed that fortune to maintain the crumbling grandeur of his ancestral home. For months, their breakfast routine had been a masterclass in silent hostility. They rarely spoke. The only sounds in the cavernous room were the ticking of the grandfather clock, the crackle of the hearth, and the polite clink of silver upon fine bone china. But this particular Tuesday morning was different. William had woken up with a sense of quiet triumph. For the past 6 weeks, he had been executing a slow, undetectable plan. He was tired of Seraphina. He was tired of her quiet, judging eyes, and more importantly, he was tired of her conservative control over the principle of her dowry, which was held in a strict trust that only she could fully liquidate. William needed that principle. His gambling debts in London had reached catastrophic proportions, held by men who did not care about his ducal coronet. And so, every evening, William had personally brought his wife a cup of her favorite Earl Grey tea before bed. And every evening, he had slipped a minute, carefully measured dose of arsenic into the porcelain cup. It was an old, aristocratic method of problem-solving. Slow, untraceable. The local physician, Dr. Arbuthnot, had already been primed by William to believe the Duchess was suffering from a wasting disease of the nerves. William expected that by Christmas, he would be a wealthy, grieving widower. The heavy oak doors opened, and Harrington, the stoic head butler, entered bearing a silver salver. The morning post had arrived. "The post, Your Grace," Harrington intoned, bowing slightly before extending the tray toward William. William took his stack of letters, dismissing the butler with a flick of his wrist. He sifted through the envelope's bills, invitations to tedious winter balls, correspondence from his estate manager in Scotland, but the last envelope gave him pause. It was sealed with dark crimson wax, bearing the unmistakable crest of the Fitzroy family, his wife's family. But what caught his eye was the handwriting. It was Seraphina's elegant, looping script. He frowned, glancing down the length of the table. Seraphina was wearing a morning gown of pale blue silk. Her dark hair was pinned up flawlessly. She looked perfectly healthy. In fact, she looked radiant, lacking the pale, sickly pallor William had been eagerly anticipating for weeks. She was engaged in the simple, mundane task of buttering a piece of golden toast. She did not look at him. Curiosity turning into a prickle of unease, William broke the wax seal with his thumb. He unfolded the thick parchment. As his eyes scanned the first few lines, the blood drained from his face. The air in his lungs vanished. His heart, previously beating with the calm rhythm of a confident predator, suddenly began to hammer frantically against his ribs. He read the lines again, and then a third time. His hands, normally as steady as a surgeon's, began to shake. The parchment rattled in the quiet room. It was a violent, uncontrollable tremor. He looked up. his aristocratic mask shattering into an expression of raw, naked terror. Across the table, Serafina did not miss a beat. She picked up a silver knife, scooped a delicate amount of butter, and spread it evenly across the crisp surface of her bread. The scraping sound echoed loudly in the dining room. Serafina. William choked out, his voice a pathetic, strangled whisper that sounded entirely foreign to him. She paused, the silver knife hovering over the china plate. She raised her eyes that William had always thought were meek and easily cowed. Now, they were dark, fathomless, and terrifyingly cold. "Is the tea to your liking this morning, William?" she asked. Her voice was like velvet, wrapped around a steel blade. "I made sure they didn't add anything extra. I know how much you value a pure brew." William's hands shook so violently that the letter slipped from his grasp, fluttering down to land beside his untouched plate of eggs. He had been utterly outplayed, and the document he had just read was the executioner's axe falling upon his neck. To understand the magnitude of William's terror, one must understand exactly what the letter contained. It was not a plea. It was not a tearful accusation of his attempts to poison her. It was a meticulously drafted document of absolute destruction. The letter read, "My dearest husband, by the time you open this correspondence, the world as you know it will have ceased to exist. I have always found it fascinating how men of your station mistake quietness for stupidity. Did you truly believe I would not taste the bitter almond notes in my evening tea? Did you think I would not notice the sudden death of the potted fern in my bedchamber, into which I have been pouring your nightly gifts for the past 6 weeks? I have not been drinking your poison, William, but I have been quite busy while you slept the sleep of the wicked." Serafina took a delicate bite of her toast. The crunch was the only sound in the room as William stared at her, paralyzed by a mixture of horror and disbelief. The narrative of the past 6 weeks played out in Serafina's mind with crystal clarity. The first night William had brought her the tea, she had been touched by the rare gesture of marital warmth, but the taste had been off. Metallic. Bitter. Serafina, unlike the sheltered daughters of other peers, had spent her youth quietly observing her father's chemical factories. She knew the taste and smell of heavy metals. Instead of confronting him, which would have resulted in her immediate physical danger, she had feigned a mild headache. Once he left the room, she poured the tea into the soil of a large fern by her window. When the fern began to wither and die 3 days later, her suspicions were confirmed. Her husband was murdering her. Most women of her era would have fled to their families, but Serafina was her father's daughter. She did not just want to escape, she wanted to obliterate the threat. The letter continued, laying out the trap she had sprung. "I realized early on that going to the local magistrate would be useless. You are the Duke of Clarendon. They are your men. So, I went to London. Do you remember the week I spent in the city last month, ostensibly to visit my ailing aunt? I did not visit my aunt, William. I visited Mr. Nathaniel Reed, the senior solicitor of Lincoln's Inn, and a man who owes his entire career to my late father." William's breath hitched. Nathaniel Reed was known as the Viper of the Thames, a ruthless, brilliant legal mind who tore through the aristocracy's scandals with terrifying efficiency. Serafina had brought Reed the dying fern, along with the dregs of the poisoned teacups she had carefully preserved in glass vials. But she hadn't stopped at securing evidence of attempted murder. That was merely the leverage. She wanted to dismantle William's life, piece by piece. She had hired private investigators, men from the shadows of London who did not care about a duke's title. They had tracked William's movements, his associations, and most importantly, his debts. "Mr. Reed and I took the liberty of looking into your finances, my love." The letter read, "I knew you were poor, but I did not realize you were desperate. £250,000 owed to the Sullivan Syndicate in London, a staggering sum. You thought my death would unlock the trust to pay them. Instead, I used the discretionary funds of my trust to purchase your debt entirely. Mr. Sullivan was quite happy to sell it to me at a premium. William gripped the edge of the mahogany table, his knuckles turning white. He felt a cold sweat break out across his forehead. His wife, the quiet, unassuming woman he thought he was casually disposing of, now owned his debt. She owned him. But the letter was not finished. Serafina's vengeance was a multi-layered masterpiece. Owning your debt was merely a precaution, Serafina had written. The true revelation came when my investigators looked into your past, specifically the year 1879, the year your first wife, Lady Catherine, tragically burned to death in that horrific carriage accident in France. William let out a low, animalistic gasp. His eyes darted wildly around the room, as if expecting ghosts to step out from the wood-paneled walls. We both know Catherine did not die in that fire, the letter stated mercilessly. You needed her out of the way because she was barren. And you needed an heir and a new dowry. But you lacked the stomach to kill her then. So, you paid to have an unrecognizable body placed in the carriage, and you locked Catherine away in the St. Jude Asylum in Cornwall under the name Jane Doe, declaring her mad. Serafina took a sip of her own tea, her dark eyes locking onto William's terrified face. She swallowed, set the delicate cup down upon its saucer with a gentle clink, and waited for him to finish reading the final, devastating paragraph. Mr. Reed traveled to Cornwall 3 days ago, William. With the proper medical authorities and a magistrate from London, Catherine has been freed. She is currently resting comfortably in a townhouse in Mayfair, which means, my dear Duke, your marriage to me is entirely fraudulent. It is null and void. You committed bigamy. The implications crashed over William like a tidal wave. Bigamy. It was a severe, criminal offense. But worse, because the marriage was legally void, every single penny of Serafina's dowry, the money that was keeping the Clarendon estate afloat, the money paying the servants, the money keeping the creditors at bay was legally hers alone. William had no right to it. He never had. This is a forgery, William whispered, his voice cracking. He stood up suddenly, his chair scraping violently against the polished floorboards. This is a lie! You are bluffing, Serafina. You are trying to frighten me. Serafina picked up a linen napkin and dabbed the corners of her mouth. She did not rise. She did not raise her voice. I have never been a woman prone to dramatics, William, she said calmly. If you look out the eastern window, you will notice a carriage has been waiting near the gates for the past hour. William rushed to the window, pulling back the heavy velvet drapes. Down the long gravel driveway sat a sleek black carriage. Standing beside it were 3 men. Even from a distance, William recognized the uniforms of the Metropolitan Police from London, out of their jurisdiction, armed with warrants that superseded local authority. Standing with them was a tall, severe-looking man in a black top hat, Nathaniel Reed. They have been waiting for my signal, Serafina said from the table. I told Mr. Reed I wished to enjoy my breakfast before the unpleasantness began. You see, William, I have a choice to make this morning. William turned slowly, his back pressed against the cold glass of the window. The arrogant, powerful Duke had vanished, replaced by a cornered, panicked animal. A choice? He stammered. Yes, Serafina replied, folding her hands neatly on the table. I hold the promissory notes for your debts. I have the evidence of the arsenic in my possession. And I have Catherine, alive and well, proving your bigamy. If I wave my handkerchief from this window, Inspector Thomas and Mr. Reed will walk through those doors. You will be arrested for attempted murder, fraud, and bigamy. You will be stripped of your title, ruined in the press, and you will spend the rest of your miserable life rotting in Newgate Prison, assuming they do not hang you for the attempt on my life. William fell to his knees. The fine fabric of his trousers snagged on the rug. Serafina, please. I was out of my mind. The debts, the pressure of the estate. It drove me to madness. You must understand. What I understand, Serafina said, her voice dropping to a glacial whisper, is that you watched me every night, smiling, asking me how I felt, waiting for the poison to rot my organs. You watched me with the casual indifference of a man stepping on an insect, I am sorry. I will do whatever you ask. Whatever you want, Serafina. Please, do not call them in. The Duke was weeping now, openly sobbing, his dignity shattered. Oh, I don't want your apologies, William. And I do not want to endure the public scandal of a trial, if I can avoid it. My father worked too hard for our family name to have it dragged through the mud of your poor choices. She reached into the pocket of her silk morning gown and withdrew a second document, placing it on the table. Beside it, she laid a silver fountain pen. This, Serafina said, is a confession. It details your attempt to poison me, your imprisonment of Catherine, and your financial ruin. It also contains a deed of surrender. You are going to sign this, William. You are going to confess to it all. If I sign that, I am ruined anyway, William cried, staring at the paper as if it were a coiled viper. If you sign it, I will keep it in my solicitor's vault, Serafina countered. In exchange, you will board a ship to Argentina tonight. I have already purchased your ticket. You will never set foot in England again. You will leave the Clarendon estate, all its properties and all its assets, in my complete, uncontested control. You will write a public letter stating that due to a deteriorating condition of the mind, you are fleeing to the continent for health reasons, leaving your wife to manage your affairs indefinitely. William stared at her. You are stealing my dukedom. I am buying it, Serafina corrected coldly, with the life you tried to take from me. If you go to Argentina, I will release a modest stipend to you every month, enough to live quietly. If you ever return, if you ever contact me, or if you refuse to sign right now, I will wave my handkerchief. The grandfather clock chimed the half hour. The sound echoed like a funeral bell. You cannot do this, William whispered, broken. I am the Duke of Clarendon. You are a corpse who has not yet stopped breathing, Serafina said, her eyes flashing with a terrifying, absolute authority. Sign the paper, William, or the police will escort you to the gallows. William trembled. He looked at the window. He looked at the poised, immaculate woman he had, vastly, fatally underestimated. Slowly, with a shaking hand, he crawled back into his chair. He picked up the silver pen. Serafina watched him drag the nib across the parchment, sealing his own exile. When he was finished, he dropped the pen and buried his face in his hands, weeping into the silent dining room. Serafina pulled the document toward her, inspected the signature, and blew gently on the ink to dry it. Then, she picked up her cup of tea, took a long, satisfying sip, and turned her attention back to her breakfast. The toast, she noted with a small smile, was perfectly buttered. The winter of 1889 descended upon the Clarendon estate, not with the creeping, oppressive chill of previous years, but with a vibrant, bustling energy, entirely foreign to the ancient, brooding stones of the manor. The Duke of Clarendon had departed for the continent, and subsequently, the Americas under the official, carefully crafted guise of a severe melancholia requiring the restorative airs of the Southern Hemisphere. Society gossiped in the drawing rooms of Mayfair, as society invariably does, but their speculative whispers were quickly drowned out by the sheer, undeniable force of the Duchess's new regime. Serafina did not merely survive her husband's departure. She conquered the massive vacuum he left behind. With William permanently exiled to the sweltering, chaotic streets of Buenos Aires, Serafina moved swiftly to consolidate her power over the dukedom. She was no longer just the quiet, unassuming duchess. She was the undisputed sovereign of a vast, albeit heavily indebted, empire. Her very first act, executed with quiet defiance, was to bring Lady Catherine William's first wife, the woman he had violently discarded and locked away in a bleak Cornish asylum, fully into the fold of the estate. Catherine was a painfully frail woman when she arrived in Derbyshire. Her spirit had been battered by a decade of forced institutionalization, and she jumped at the sound of slamming doors. But under Serafina's fiercely protective care and the brilliant, deeply apologetic medical attention of Dr. Arbuthnot, who was eager to make amends for his previous foolish gullibility regarding Serafina's so-called wasting disease, Catherine began to bloom. The two women, bound by the shared trauma of William's cruelty, formed an impenetrable alliance. It was a sisterhood, forged in the searing fires of survival. Officially, to protect them both from legal scandal, Catherine was introduced to the household staff and the local gentry as Cousin Matilda, a reclusive, widowed relative of the wealthy Fitzroy family. In private, behind the heavy oak doors of the master study, she was Serafina's closest confidant and sharpest advisor. Together, they began the monumental, exhausting task of saving Clarendon from absolute financial ruin. Serafina applied the ruthless industrial efficiency she had learned from watching her railway tycoon father to the stagnant, antiquated aristocratic estate. Serafina's sweeping reforms of 1889. The eradication of parasitic debts. Serafina ruthlessly audited the estate's crumbling ledgers. She discovered decades of systemic theft and fired the corrupt land steward's men who had been skimming profits under William's negligent nose for years. She replaced them with hungry, ambitious accounting clerks poached directly from her father's London offices. When the head steward, a bloated man named Higgins, attempted to protest his dismissal, Serafina simply placed his forged receipts on the desk and gave him 1 hour to vacate the premises before she summoned the magistrate. Agricultural modernization. Recognizing that nostalgia did not pay the creditors, she mercilessly sold off William's prized, but utterly useless, stables of racing thoroughbreds. The massive injection of capital was immediately reinvested into steam-powered threshing machines and modern, scientifically backed crop rotation techniques. The tenant farmers, initially suspicious of a woman's oversight, quickly changed their tune when the new methods tripled the yield of their harvests within 2 seasons. The coal seams. Utilizing her father's extensive geological surveys, which William had previously ignored out of aristocratic snobbery, she opened a highly lucrative coal mine on the rocky northern edge of the property. She funded the construction of a private spur line connecting the mine directly to the booming Midland Railway. By the spring of 1890, the Clarendon estate was not just solvent. It was a juggernaut of Victorian industry, its coffers overflowing with new wealth. Serafina was hailed in the London papers as a modern marvel, a true empress of industry. But 7,000 miles away, in the sweltering, disease-ridden port city of Buenos Aires, William Hastings was entirely unconcerned with agricultural yields or the wonders of steam power. He was consumed, body and soul, by an acid, festering hatred. William's life in Argentina was a brutal, humiliating departure from the ducal splendor he had once commanded. Serafina's promised modest stipend was exactly that modest. It provided him a respectable, if cramped, townhouse in the Recoleta district and enough funds for decent meals, but it completely cut him off from the opulent, reckless, high-stakes lifestyle he craved like a drug. He was a phantom, wandering the humid streets, an exiled king stripped of his crown, forced to read weeks-old English newspapers and watch his usurper bask in the glory that he firmly believed should have been his. The oppressive heat of the Argentine summer only fueled his madness. He spent his days drenched in sweat, drinking heavy, cheap red wine, and pacing the hardwood floors of his study, plotting his revenge. He knew he could never legally return to England. The damning confession Serafina held in her solicitor's vault, along with the living, breathing proof of his bigamy in Catherine, guaranteed him a cold prison cell. But his desperate mind latched onto a dark loophole. If Serafina were to suffer a sudden, tragic accident, the confession would likely remain buried, and as her grieving widower, since Catherine's true identity was a closely guarded secret, he could return to claim the revitalized, now unfathomably wealthy estate. He needed an assassin. And to hire an assassin of the necessary caliber, he needed a vast sum of money he simply did not possess. William's twisted salvation materialized amidst the historic Argentine economic boom and the dangerously reckless investments of the British banking establishment. Leveraging his still active, prestigious title as the Duke of Clarendon, a title the wealthy Argentine elite and British expatriates respected without questioning the vague rumors of his health exile, William managed to secure a highly confidential meeting with a prominent agent of the Baring Brothers Bank. At the time, the Barings were the most powerful merchant bank in London, and they were currently pouring millions of pounds into Argentine infrastructure. William, dressed in his finest remaining silk suit, utilizing every ounce of his practiced aristocratic charm. Armed with a heavy portfolio of expertly forged land deeds he had managed to smuggle out of England, he sat across from the greedy, star-struck banking agent. Playing the role of the visionary aristocrat perfectly, William convinced the Baring agent to issue him a massive, off-the-books line of credit, supposedly to purchase vast tracts of prime ranch land in the Pampas. It was a desperate, spectacularly fraudulent gamble, but the banker's awe of the ducal title blinded him to the risk. It worked flawlessly. With £50,000 in, secured, highly negotiable Baring bank drafts burning a hole in his pocket, William descended into the dangerous, lawless underworld of the La Boca port. The air in the dockside tavern was thick with the stench of rotting fish, cheap tobacco, and spilled rum. Cutthroats and smugglers eyed him from the shadows, but William did not flinch. He had a singular, murderous purpose. There, amidst the dregs of the continent, he found his instrument of vengeance, a disgraced former Pinkerton detective named Thomas Blake. Blake was a chillingly quiet man, devoid of conscience. A ghost who specialized in making wealthy, inconvenient problems disappear forever. "You will travel to Derbyshire," William instructed Blake, his voice a low, venomous hiss, as he slid a thick manila envelope of Baring bank drafts across the splintered, sticky tavern table. "You will find the Duchess of Clarendon, and you will ensure she takes a fatal fall from her horse. Or perhaps suffers a tragic, undeniable hunting accident. I do not care how messy it is, nor how it is done, as long as it cannot be traced back to me or my interests." Blake slowly reached out, his calloused fingers thumbing through the thick stack of bank drafts. His cold, dead eyes remained fixed on William's desperate face, revealing absolutely nothing. "This is half, and the rest of the payment? Upon my successful, unchallenged return to London," William promised, his eyes gleaming with a manic, feverish light that bordered on total insanity. "When I reclaim my estate, you will be a very, very rich man, Mr. Blake." Blake gave a single curt nod, smoothly pocketing the fortune inside his heavy leather duster. "Consider the Duchess a ghost, Your Grace." William leaned back in his rickety wooden chair, a cruel, triumphant smile finally stretching across his sweat-streaked face. He poured himself another glass of the bitter local wine, savoring the taste for the first time in a year. The trap was finally set. Serafina had outplayed him once with legal trickery, but she was, at her core, a mere woman playing at being a duke. She was soft. She could not possibly anticipate the brutal, physical violence currently sailing toward her from across the Atlantic. Late November of 1890 brought a biting, relentless frost to the Derbyshire countryside. The Clarendon estate was draped in a thick blanket of snow, the grand manor house glowing with the warm light of gas lamps against the dark, winter sky. Thomas Blake had been in England for 3 weeks, meticulously studying the estate. He was a professional. He had noted the patrols of the gamekeepers, the routines of the household staff, and the daily habits of his target. He learned that Serafina often took solitary walks through the western hedge maze at dusk, a time when the fading light and isolation provided the perfect opportunity for a fatal, untraceable accident. On a Tuesday evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, skeletal shadows across the snow, Blake made his move. Dressed in a heavy wool coat, a garrote wire coiled loosely in his leather-gloved hands, He slipped past the wrought iron gates and navigated the labyrinthine paths of the maze. He found her standing near the central fountain, wrapped in a thick fur cloak, her back to him. The crunch of his boots on the snow was entirely muffled. He raised the wire, closing the distance with the silent grace of a predator. 10 paces. 5. 3. I was wondering when you would finally make your move, Mr. Blake. The voice did not come from the woman at the fountain. It came from behind him. Blake spun around, dropping into a defensive crouch, his hand flying to the revolver inside his coat. But before he could draw his weapon, he found himself staring down the barrels of 3 double-barreled hunting shotguns. Stepping out from the shadows of the tall yew hedges were 3 men. 2 were burly estate gamekeepers. The third was Nathaniel Reed, the terrifyingly calm solicitor from London, holding his shotgun with the practiced ease of an aristocrat on a grouse shoot. The woman at the fountain turned around and lowered her fur hood. It was not Serafina. It was Catherine. A soft chuckle drifted through the frigid air. Serafina emerged from a stone pavilion to Blake's left, flanked by 2 more armed guards. She was dressed impeccably in a dark green velvet riding habit, her breath pluming in the freezing air. She looked less like a target and more like a commanding general inspecting a captured prisoner. "You are very good at hiding in the shadows, Mr. Blake," Serafina said, her voice carrying the crisp authority of absolute control. "But you are very poor at understanding the modern banking system." Blake stood perfectly still, his eyes darting between the shotguns leveled at his chest. "I don't know what you're talking about, lady." "Oh, I think you do," Serafina replied, taking a slow, measured step forward. "My husband sent you. He used bank drafts from the Baring brothers to secure your services in Buenos Aires. Did you truly believe William could move that kind of capital without my knowledge?" Serafina smiled a cold, terrifying smile that would have made William's blood run icy. "You see, Mr. Blake, when I took over this estate, I made it my business to know everything about my husband's finances. I maintain a very lucrative relationship with several senior clerks at the Bank of England and the major merchant banks. The moment William used his title to secure a loan from the Baring agent in Argentina, a telegram was sent to Mr. Reed here in London. We knew you were coming before you even boarded your steamship." Blake's jaw tightened. He was trapped, but he was a mercenary, and mercenaries understood leverage. "I have half the money," he growled. "I can just walk away. Let me go, and you'll never see me again." "Walk away?" Serafina laughed softly. "Mr. Blake, you are not listening to me. I said you do not understand the banking system." She gestured to Mr. Reed, who pulled a folded copy of the Times from his overcoat and tossed it onto the snow at Blake's feet. "Read the headline, Mr. Blake," Reed instructed coldly. Blake glanced down. The bold black letters screamed from the front page. "The Baring Crisis. Merchant Bank on the brink of collapse, following Argentine default." "The Baring Brothers Bank is currently insolvent," Serafina explained, her tone dripping with mock sympathy. "Their reckless investments in Argentina have caused a catastrophic financial panic in London. As of 3 days ago, the Bank of England had to step in to prevent a total collapse of the global market. Every single promissory note, line of credit, and bank draft issued by the Barings in Argentina over the last month is entirely worthless." The color drained from Blake's face as the reality set in. "The money William gave you," Serafina said softly, "is nothing but pretty paper. You crossed an ocean for a bankrupt ghost." Blake slowly lowered his hands, the garrote wire falling uselessly into the snow. He looked at Serafina, realizing he was entirely outmatched by the quiet, aristocratic woman standing before him. "What do you want?" "I want you to go back to Buenos Aires," Serafina said, her eyes flashing with a ruthless brilliance. "I am going to give you £10,000 in solid, untraceable gold sovereigns, tonight. In exchange, you will return to Argentina. You will find my husband. And you will explain to him, in whatever vivid manner you choose, that his funds have bounced, that he owes a dangerous man a great deal of money, and that if he ever attempts to look toward England again, The next men I send will not be bankers. A slow, dark smile crept across the assassin's face. He understood perfectly. Serafina wasn't just defeating William, she was turning his own weapon against him. Consider it done, Your Grace. 3 months later, the blistering heat of the Argentine summer had returned to Buenos Aires. William Hastings sat in the corner of a filthy, dimly lit tavern in the slums of La Boca. His fine clothes were stained and ragged. His hands trembled, not with the arrogance of a duke, but with the terror of a hunted animal. He had lost his townhouse. The bearing agents, frantic to recoup their losses from the catastrophic default, had seized his assets, realized his deeds were forged, and issued warrants for his arrest. But the local constabulary was the least of his worries. The door to the tavern swung open, letting in a blast of hot, humid air. A tall man in a heavy coat stepped inside, his boots thudding ominously against the wooden floorboards. It was Thomas Blake. William scrambled backward, knocking over his chair, scrambling like a rat in a trap. Blake did not draw a weapon. He didn't need to. He simply smiled the cold, dead smile of a man who had come to collect a debt that could only be paid in blood and terror. William squeezed his eyes shut, finally realizing the absolute, undeniable truth. He had not been defeated by bad luck or circumstance. He had been utterly, systematically annihilated by a woman he had assumed was nothing more than a quiet, obedient prize. Back in Derbyshire, the morning sun streamed through the stained glass of the Clarendon dining room. The room was warm, filled with the scent of fresh pastries and blooming orchids. Serafina sat at the head of the great mahogany table. To her right sat Catherine, looking healthy and vibrant, reading a novel. To her left sat Mr. Reed, reviewing the latest, wildly profitable ledgers from the coal mines. Harrington, the butler, stepped into the room, bowing deeply. The Morning Post. Your Grace. Serafina took the silver tray, glancing at the lack of letters bearing South American postage. She smiled, a genuine, radiant expression of peace. She picked up her silver knife, scooped a delicate amount of butter, and spread it evenly across the crisp surface of her golden toast. The estate was safe, her life was her own, and the tea, finally, was perfect. Serafina's brilliant victory proves that underestimating a quiet mind is the most dangerous gamble of all. What did you think of her masterful, multi-layered revenge against the treacherous Duke? Would you have shown him any mercy? Or did he get exactly what he deserved in the slums of Argentina? Let us know your thoughts below. If you enjoyed this thrilling historical tale of betrayal and cunning, please like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe for more incredible stories.
Hi, my name is Hidden Injustice, the owner and manager of Hidden Injustice. After watching the video, the Duke read her letter at the breakfast table. His hands shook. She buttered her toast. I'd really like to know what you think. How did this story make you feel? What lingered with me most was the quiet strength at the heart of the story. There's something fascinating about moments when one person remains calm while everything around them seems to shift. In historical romance, those subtle exchanges can sometimes say more than dramatic confrontations ever could. I'm curious what stood out to you. Was there a particular moment that changed how you viewed the characters? And what do you think carried more weight in the story, the letter itself or the way it was received? One gentle takeaway for me is that honesty often has a lasting impact, even when it's delivered without anger or fanfare. In everyday life, that can be a reminder to express ourselves clearly and confidently when something truly matters. If this story gave you something to think about, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy historical romance stories like this one, feel free to like the video or subscribe. Thanks for spending part of your day with us at Hidden Injustice.